everyone, and welcome to this month's LinkedIn Live. We are going to be talking about the power of connection. And there is no better person to speak to us about this than the one and only incredible Carole Robin. Carole, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. And I know we're going to have a great time.
We always do. So for my listeners, as always, please share in the chat where you're coming from. I'm in San Francisco. Carole, where are you coming from today?
I'm in San Francisco too.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So what gloomy day that we're going to brighten.
No. Yeah, it's our classic summer in San Francisco. As Mark Twain famously said, the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco, and today is one of those winter in the summer days for us. So I want to share with all of you a little bit about Carole, who is taught the legendary Interpersonal Dynamics course at Stanford Business School, also affectionately known as Touchy Feely, in which she taught literally thousands of business school students about why connection matters, not only at in one's personal life, but also in one's professional life. She's now the co-founders of Leaders in Tech, which offers programs for CEOs and executives who want a deep dive learning experience and a taste of what Carole taught at Stanford. She is co-author of the incredible book, Connect: Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues. And Carole, you were just telling me that you all just surpassed the mark of over 120,000 copies sold. I'm part of that because I did just purchase your book. I encourage every single person who is here today to go out and get one yourself. It's on Amazon. I know that it's also on your website, Carole. It will change your life.
And it's available in 14 languages.
And it's available in 14 languages. That's awesome. So you can also go to the book website for a free downloadable self-assessment and guidance on creating your own learning group. And then finally, also, Carole, you have a Carole AI in which people can ask you questions and get advice from you, and that's available in 100 languages. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. So a wealth of experience, and then Carole also happens to be one of my all-time favorite human beings in the world, someone who I admire and love deeply. And so I was so excited to have you, Carole, as my guest today. So again, thank you so much for being my guest. We have people coming in from all over here. We've got people coming in from North Carolina. We've got people coming in from Switzerland, from California, different parts of California. We've got Canada. We got Canadian representation here. So we got an international audience here. So Carole, I want to start first with hearing a little bit about your story and what led you to the work that you are doing today.
Well, I'll start by just saying that I had a very circuitous route to where I ended up. I've had 6 different careers. I'm not a career academic, even though my longest career was teaching Touchy Feely at Stanford. But if we really go back to the moment when I realized this was the path I needed to be on, I was 10 years into, I was the first woman hired in a non-clerical job at the world's largest industrial automation company. And I learned very quickly there was no place in business for feelings. And so
Right.
I got very good at it, which is a little ironic given the fact that I became known as the Queen of Touchy Feely many, many years later. But anyway, I learned and I kept getting promoted. And 10 years later, I was running a $50 million region. At that time, that was a lot of money. And I was at an offsite with my team. They were all still men. Ladies, for those of you who are on the call, and or even if you identify as they, we didn't have that in those days. So they're all guys, straight white guys, in fact. And I got a little excited about what I thought we could do. And I got crickets. I got a little
Mm.
more excited. I got crickets. Finally, one of my guys leans in and he says, Carole, is that like water in the corner of your eye?
Oh,
Are you gonna like cry? And then he says, are you human after all? Are
wow.
you human after all? Then I burst out crying. And I
Oh.
said, I don't think there is anything more important for us to talk about for the next 2 days at this offsite. I mean, I also said, you don't think I'm effing human, but I don't want to offend anybody on the call. Uh, and I ripped up our agenda, and we spent the next 2 days talking about who we were, why we were there, what we needed and wanted, what we wanted from each other. And to this day, that was a very long time ago because I'm now 70 years old. But at that,
And you make 70 look great, by the way.
to this day, I believe that was the day that I became a leader, and that was the day we became a team. And for many, probably, I don't know, that was 45 years ago, maybe 40 years, in that range. To this day, those are who are still with us would follow me anywhere. So
Wow.
that was the beginning of my recognition that there was something off about what was going on in business. And by definition, a social norm that was permeating in what I started to observe, a way of showing up that that was very distancing. And business, of course, it was all about relationships sort of didn't matter. But you know what? People do business with people. They don't do business with ideas or products or strategies or money. They do business with people. So uh, eventually, as I discovered this work, I became more and more convinced that this is what I was put on the planet to do.
Mm.
Because I believe with every fiber of my being that if we had a critical mass of human beings on this planet equipped with the capacity to build stronger functional relationships, we wouldn't just have stronger teams and better companies and more functional organizations. We'd have more functional families. We'd have more robust communities. We might even have a more functional government, God forbid, when I really dream big. So there was a point at which I decided, this was what I was put on the planet to do. I was put on the planet to help people learn how to develop strong, robust relationships. And I always feel a little bit jittery when I say that because it sounds a little pretentious to say, really,
Mhm.
we were put on the planet. But I really, that's my life's mission, and it has been for several decades.
I mean, we could also almost call this the power of purpose. Each of us, I
Yes.
think, has this inborn, this born sense of purpose, and finding that. And you really found yours. And when we each shine brightly, we help ourselves, but we also help the world. And so I'm so glad that you've been able to bring
Yeah.
that
And,
to.
I think it's really what you just said reminds me that there were a number of us who taught interpersonal dynamics at Stanford. Um, and I had a number of my colleagues come to me and say, I don't understand. Why does everybody want to take the class from you? Uh, and I, and the answer is not complicated because I live, breathe, sleep relationships. I don't shy away from them. I'm not afraid of them. I lean into them when they get complicated because, God forbid, we should learn how to actually create stronger relationships as a result of not papering over everything. So I think it helped me that I was kind of a poster child for what I was teaching.
Wow. Yeah, I think sometimes there's, this social norm, as you spoke about in the business world, around distancing, and yet a reminder that we are people after all. But
Yes.
also, I think that there is this expectation around politeness sometimes, and so we can't be direct with one another. We
Yeah.
can't be both direct and loving, and so I'm curious if that politeness or
Yeah.
quote professional kind of ties into that social norm that
Ve-
distances us,
Very
especially
much
with
so.
workforce.
Yes, very much so. And by the way, I see in a comment that somebody noticed my necklace, which is a high, which means life in Hebrew. My mother gave it to me on my 21st birthday. I have never taken it off. And one of the pillars of Judaism is tikkun olam, to repair the world.
Mm.
We are asked when put on the planet to leave it a little better off than we found it. We're never going to fix all the problems, but yes, thank you for noticing. And yes, Janice, it is very much my life's purpose to leave the world a little bit better. Now back to your uh, question, Laura. I think that this whole we become socialized very early to be nice, to be polite. And I'm not, the opposite of direct is indirect. Most people think that the opposite of indirect is brutal honesty,
Mm.
which is usually more brutal than honest. So
Mhm.
most people don't understand that if I really trust our relationship and I believe in the resilience of our relationship, I will tell you if you've done something that's upsetting to me. And we will actually come out the other side of that conversation better off with a stronger, more robust, and more caring relationship. So,
Isn't that the irony that it really is the short, direct path to a deeper, more meaningful relationship?
remember the Hallmark ad campaign, depending on how old you are, that used to be when you care to send the very best. So my co-author David Bradford always says sometimes you have to care enough to say the very worst. Uh,
I love that. That's great. So, to all of the listeners, thank you again for sharing where you're coming from. And Janice, thank you for sharing that comment. Please do share your comments, and also please share your questions with us. And so it looks like, yes, good relationships foster good mental health as well. Wouldn't you
unquestionably,
agree?
unquestionably. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of research. There's a lot of research that supports that. So even if we go back to, Vivek Murthy's book, that came out not too long before our book came out, and he talks a lot in that book about how lonely people are,
Mhm.
and what I've said ever since then is, yeah, people realize they need more relationship, they realize they need more connection, but they don't know where to even start.
Yep.
And that's where I'm really really happy that the work that I've done is getting farther, is having more reach, and people are discovering it because it's one of the paths
I
to the
think that we are really good at diagnosing the problems, not so good at coming up with the solutions. And if there's anything that your work has achieved, Carole, is literally one student at a time, now one leader in tech at a time, and now through your book, one human being at a time around the globe, is not just why it matters, and not just identifying the problem. Yes, we have an epidemic of loneliness here in the United States, but also increasingly around the world. But how you actually go about connecting. And the truth of the matter is, as much as we know it's important, we seem to be having an exceedingly difficult time doing so. So I wanted to start to dig into what you taught your students in your legendary interpersonal dynamics course at Stanford. And I love the fact that people not only wanted the course, but they wanted you. I don't blame them one bit. In the workshop that I got to be in, as we spoke about before coming on here, I wanted to not only be with you, but I wanted to sit beside you. So I totally get it. And I'm just curious if there are any students who are listening in right now. If you are a former student, please write that in the chat. But let's start to dig into this. So
Sure.
let's start first with this. In the outside of your book, you kind of describe this analogy that it's like climbing a mountain with,
Yes.
building a relationship. And these relationships look different as you describe. I mean, it would be great if we could have an exceptional relationship with everyone, but that's not possible, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Furthermore, but you describe this as kind of like climbing a mountain, and
Right.
first we want to get to the meadow, and then we want to tackle the summit. So can you just kind of give us a very high level lay of the
Sure.
land when we're first starting to think about how do we start to build better relationships?
Sure. So let's start with relationships exist on a continuum. At one end of the continuum is what we call contact and no connection. Those are your thousands of Facebook friends. And by the way, as an aside, I think social media is one of the worst things that's happened to humanity and to social connection. Um, and also dysfunction is at that end of the continuum. At the other end of the continuum is what David and I, when we wrote the book, came to call exceptional. But what's important to note is that along the way, you get to robust and functional. And that's where the analogy of the meadow comes in, because you don't need to get all the way to the summit with every single person that you're going to climb the mountain with. That's impractical and unnecessary. Uh, but it's useful to have the tools you need to get to at least robust and functional. And then what happens is once you have these 6 competencies that we talk about, then you can decide on a very selective basis whether there's a handful of people you want to, you want to rest at the meadow with everyone. And then after you've rested, there may be some that you want to climb to the summit with, and that would be exceptional. But what's important is that what you've learned to do is move the relationship along the continuum.
Mm.
And there are, the relationships that have moved along the continuum have 6 hallmarks. The first one is that I feel better known by you. And the second one is that you allow me to know you better. So we feel more known to each other,
Mm.
and we are more honest with each other. Those are the first 3. And the fourth, 5th, and 6th have to do with, I'm sorry, the third one is we trust each other because we know each other better. The third, 4th, 5th, and 6th have to do with being honest with each other and learning to have productive conflict and keeping it real, so to speak, telling each other the truth, being invested in each other's learning and growth. That's what it means to actually have a relationship that has at least gotten to robust and functional. And there are skills that are attached to each of those hallmarks.
And you actually, in your book, kind of show these different zones. And there's the comfort zone in the
Yes.
center, and then
Yes.
way out here is kind of the danger zone. I know personally, I tend to dive right into the danger zone sometimes, and that's actually not such a great idea. So you advocate for this 15% rule.
Yes.
Can
Yes.
you talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit? And again, to our listeners, please pose your questions as we're going along. But over to you.
Really glad you asked me that, because first, think of 3 concentric circles. The one in the middle is the comfort zone. You don't think twice about what you say or do. The one on the very outside is the danger zone. In a million years, I'd never think about sharing that with you or doing that. But there's this important circle in the middle, which is the learning zone. meaning you have to step outside your comfort zone in order to learn something new, but you also have to stay within your danger zone, or you flip yourself out or the other person out. And by the way, what's important is that in every relationship so what my comfort level might look like with you, Laura, is different than what my comfort zone might look like with someone else. Every relationship has its own dynamic. So I used to say, so you got to step into your learning zone in order to grow, develop, deepen relationships. And my students used to say, but Carole, the minute I step outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? I know I'm supposed to be in my learning zone, but what if I stepped out too far? And that's where we came up with 15%. Step a little bit outside your comfort zone. And if you step a little bit outside, you're much less likely to freak yourself or the other person out. And then what happens is you've developed a new, slightly larger comfort zone with that person. Now you can go 15% beyond that. And that's how we deepen relationships. So that applies to disclosure, that applies to feedback, that applies to inquiry and curiosity. So all these elements that we talk about, my 15% in terms of what I'm going to share with you might be very different than my 15% of what I'll share with someone else.
And I love how you clarified that this is important not only for your own comfort, but also for the other person.
Yes. Yes. So in fact, in the book, we talk about, I see Lorelai's question, but let me, please leave it up because I won't remember it. I'm right in the middle of a thought. You just said, I'm sorry, remind me what you just said.
It's about respecting your own sense of comfort and
yes,
but also for the other person feeling comfortable, not freaking them out.
Exactly. In the book, we talk about two antennae. We're all equipped with two antennae. One antenna, we learn to pick up signals of what's going on for the other person. The other antenna requires us to pick up signals on what's going on for us. And the more in touch we are with both sets of signals, which means being present, not only with the other person, but also with ourselves. This is where people who meditate and have good mindfulness practices tend to be better at this, in terms of understanding their antenna, someone else's antenna. That informs some of your choices. Now let me come to Lorelai's question. What advice do I have for dealing with people who don't want to have a better relationship and won't take the time to get to know us? So let me unpack that question for a moment, because how do you know they don't want it?
Did they Great question, right?
Sorry, I don't really want a better relationship with you, so pound sand. Because unless they have said that to you, you have drawn a conclusion based on their behavior, which may be a correct conclusion, but it also may be an incorrect conclusion. This is a really fundamental concept that we teach in the course, that's in the book. It's the concept of the three realities. In any exchange between two people, there are three realities. There's whatever my intent is and the way I see the world. That's reality number one. There's what I do and what I say, my behavior. That's reality number two. That reality is the only thing shared by both of us. And then there's reality number three, which is the impact of what I said and how I behaved on you. So I have clearly done something somewhere along the line, or maybe many times, that have resulted in you deciding that I don't care about a relationship, but you don't really know that.
Right.
So one thing that you might want to do, if you care to explore it, is you might want to get curious about what might be going on for me. You might want to suspend judgment about what's going on for me. So there's a whole bunch of skills here in terms of inquiry and curiosity and suspending judgment. By the way, if I'm doing something that is resulting in you concluding that I don't want a relationship with you, I'm probably doing the same thing to other people.
Mm.
And then that means you're holding some important data for me. And wow, data is always a gift. You know, no matter, that's why I never use constructive and I never use negative and positive feedback. All feedback is data. Therefore, all data is positive. Sometimes it's feedback about something that is constructive that you might want me to change. Sometimes it's feedback about something that's affirming, that's something you want me to leverage, but it's always positive. So, I mean, I could riff on just this question for the rest of our time, but the bottom line is, if you care, now it's your call. If they've behaved in ways that you just don't even want to make the effort, well, don't even start to climb the mountain. But if you think that this is a person you might want to climb the mountain with, just because they're difficult, doesn't mean they may not be worth having as a climbing partner. And maybe you'll get to the lower meadow, and that's all. And that may be better than staying down at the foothill and having a dysfunctional relationship. I'll stop there.
Yeah, Carole, I think that I sometimes have this notion that there's the possibility of having an exceptional relationship with every single person, and I'm just going to push and push and push and try to tackle that summit with every single person. But the reality is it's actually okay to let go of that, and just that it's okay to be in the lower meadow with some people.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that is really important to recognize is that relationships take a lot of work and a lot of effort from both parties. It's called interpersonal for a reason, by the way. It's not all up to you.
Right.
Okay. So if you're going to invest that kind of energy and time and commitment, then it's just impractical to do that to the level that you have to get to exceptional with everybody. But it's not impractical or out of the question to invest enough of it to where you get to at least functional, especially with people in your life that you have to work with, that are in your family, not by your choice. I get predictably hundreds of calls and emails and, a month, and sometimes visits from former students and alumni, both Stanford and now leaders in tech leaders in tech were all CEOs to start with, but students who say, I just became a CEO, I owe it all to you. Or you'd predict that. Stanford Business School, of course. I just raised my third round of funding. I owe it all to you. You'd also predict that. But let me tell you, the ones I'm much, much prouder of, and the ones that really make my heart swell, are one I just got a couple of weeks ago. I'm pretty sure your class just saved my marriage.
Oh.
Or one that I got right after the book came out from a student who said, I just finally reconciled my relationship with my brother, who I had not talked to for 2 years. Thank you for writing a book, because he didn't have the benefit of going to Stanford, and he and I walked through this book together.
Wow.
That's what I was put on the planet to do, not help CEOs be more successful.
Carole, knowing you as a friend and a colleague, and having been in your workshop and in preparation for our conversation, digging through this book, there's like layer upon layer upon layer, and I'm just going to plant the seed for our listeners here, where you not only help to kind of demystify this and help to what do I actually do, but you provide a lot of language that when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, like pinches and crunches. Yes. So you have to read the book to find out what it is, or Breakfast of the Champions, or that's over the net. You're, or even one conversation at a time. So when you read the book, and if you have not already read the book, please do. It will literally help you to enrich your personal relationships as well as your professional relationships. And if there's ever a time in the world when we need it, it is now. So, Carole, I would love if you could.
Before we run out of time, there are many questions here about how do you approach difficult conversations? What do you do when, about conflict? Please read the book. All of your questions are answered in that book. And obviously, in a half an hour, we're not going to cover it all. Or ask my AI. Go to my website and ask my AI, and it will help answer that question.
So, Carole, I want to make sure that everybody knows how to follow your work and how to stay in touch with you. So in 10 seconds or less, what's the best way for people to follow your work?
Connect with me on LinkedIn, or go to my website, connectandrelate.com. And by the way, yeah, I've got one of those. I don't want you to sell me anything, so I've got one of those setups where you need my email address. Just ask Laura and her team for my email address, and then you can connect with me. But that's the best way to be in touch with me.
And for all of our listeners, for all the wonderful questions that you asked, we will hold on to those. I'm going to touch base with Carole afterwards and see if she can respond to some of those. We will have a follow-up newsletter that will be coming out that will capture this, but also we can respond. I can ask Carole to respond to some of those questions. But again, you can go to Carole AI to get that. So, Carole,
by the way, don't Google Carole AI. It'll just take you to a YouTube video and not to the AI.
So, Carole, if there's one takeaway for our listeners, one final takeaway in 30 seconds or less, what is it?
I already said it takes work, and it's really worth it. And every relationship is different. So just because something worked with one person doesn't mean it's going to work with somebody else. And very, very few relationships aren't worth at least trying.
Oh, perfect. Carole, thank you so much for being our guest today. Thank you to all of our listeners. We will see you all in September for our next session, guest TBD. In the meantime, have a wonderful August. Continue to enjoy your summer of love, which is why I brought Carole here. This is my dedicated summer of love. Carole, love you so much. Thank you so much for being our guest today, and for all of our listeners. Thank you, and see you in September.
Thank you. That was great.